Could we truly be contemplating a total reconstruction of the platform, the very system I had refined over 12 long years? I gazed at Marina, our newly appointed Chief Technology Officer, with complete incredulity. Her pen drummed rhythmically against the polished mahogany surface that had materialized in her workspace immediately following her advancement. Nain, you must comprehend that everything is transitioning toward cloud-native frameworks nowadays, she responded, avoiding direct eye contact. Your system, though remarkable in its era, simply doesn't align with contemporary technological requirements. Align with contemporary technological requirements? I echoed softly, the phrase leaving a sour taste. The system hasn't experienced a single security compromise in 12 years. It has handled more than $18 billion worth of transactions. But certainly, let's discard it because it lacks current appeal. My identity is Nain Parker. I am 46 years of age, and until this moment, I held the position of Senior Systems Architect at Northwell Logistics in Eugene, Oregon. I constructed our internal framework from the ground up, each component, each security measure, each encryption layer. It might not have been stylish, but it was impenetrable. And now a consultant who had been present at the company for merely 6 weeks was determined that everything required replacement. Marina exhaled deeply, finally raising her gaze to meet mine. The board has already given Elliot's proposal their blessing. We're not gathered here to argue about whether we'll proceed with the reconstruction. We're here to examine your position in this transition. I experienced an internal shift at that moment. An icy certainty settled in my core. Right then, I understood that my time at Northwell was drawing to a close. Allow me to predict. You want me to record everything, educate the fresh team, and afterward what? A transition to a strategic consulting position. I gestured quotation marks with my hands, unable to suppress the sharpness in my tone. Marina appeared genuinely uncomfortable. We appreciate your institutional expertise, Nain. Nobody comprehends the system as thoroughly as you do. However, outdated systems create vulnerabilities. Isn't that Elliot's constant refrain in those polished presentations? I confronted her directly. She offered no contradiction. Rather, she pushed a document folder in my direction. This contains the transition strategy. The team requires thorough documentation of all primary components within 4 weeks. Following that, there will be a knowledge transfer period lasting roughly 3 months. I made no move toward the folder. And afterward, she continued with political smoothness, we'll explore future opportunities. Translation: they'll escort me out once they've extracted every piece of useful information. As I departed Marina's office, I encountered Elliot in the corridor. He sported yet another perfectly tailored suit, gesticulating enthusiastically while presenting some fresh concept to a cluster of impressed junior developers. His terminology drifted toward me: Zero Trust Framework, Serverless Implementation, Microservices Architecture. I nearly grinned. They were completely unaware of what awaited them. What nobody at Northwell appeared to understand or recall was that the most vital components of our platform weren't merely code I had written. They were constructed upon a specialized encryption library that I had personally created and maintained independently under a developer license registered specifically under my name. It wasn't corporate property. It belonged to me. I returned to my workstation, my thoughts already determining precisely how this scenario would unfold. I can still recall my first day at Northwell Logistics. The year was 2011, and the organization was merely a determined startup employing 15 people from a renovated warehouse space. The platform consisted of a collection of PHP scripts and Excel macros maintained through improvisation and hope. We require something more solid, Jackson, the founder, had explained during my interview. Something capable of expanding alongside us. Something secure. Constructing the initial complete version of the platform required 3 years. I maintained 80-hour work schedules, sustained by caffeine and resolve. The original team would jest that I resembled machinery more than humanity, continuing to type long after everyone else had departed for home. Don't you maintain interests beyond programming? Teresa from the accounting department once inquired. I did, but this represented my masterpiece. Every line I coded, Every system I designed felt like incorporating a fragment of my essence into the organization. The platform expanded as Northwell expanded, from 15 staff members to 50, then to hundreds as we extended throughout the Pacific Northwest. Our customer base progressed from local enterprises to Fortune 500 corporations. Throughout this growth, my platform remained steady, scaling and adjusting. The security components were my special source of pride. I created a custom encryption library after identifying weaknesses in some conventional alternatives. I named it Parker Crypt, my minor vanity, and provided licensing to Northwell under particular conditions. I was thorough regarding the licensing contract, guaranteeing I retained authorship and authority. It appeared to be a technicality, then. I had no intentions of departing after all. Throughout the years, executives arrived and departed. Jackson sold his ownership and pursued fresh ventures. The board introduced professional management with advanced degrees and corporate experience. Suddenly, hierarchical layers existed where we had once all reported directly to the founders. I remained concentrated on the platform, incorporating new components as required, strengthening security, enhancing performance. It wasn't the most thrilling work, but there was fulfillment in maintaining something dependable. Then arrived the fresh wave of leadership, including Marina Carver as CTO. She had originated from a prominent position at a technology corporation and clearly possessed ambitions extending beyond Northwell. Soon after her arrival, she introduced Elliot Navarro as a consultant. "He'll assist us in modernizing our methodology," she declared during a company-wide meeting. Elliot specializes in digital transformation and cloud migration. I observed as Elliot captivated the organization, conducting interviews, facilitating workshops, delivering presentations filled with jargon and vibrant graphics. He communicated with overwhelming confidence regarding technologies he clearly comprehended only at surface level. "Your platform is intriguing," he informed me during our initial individual meeting, in a tone suggesting he intended the reverse. Very monolithic. Very characteristic of 2010. I should have recognized the warning signs immediately. The initial significant setback occurred during the quarterly technology assessment. I was scheduled to present the platform enhancement roadmap I had developed over months, plans to modularize certain elements while preserving the rock-solid security foundation. However, when I reached the conference room, Elliot was already displaying his slides. "We've conducted a thorough analysis of the existing architecture," he was stating, "and identified substantial technical debt preventing Northwell from achieving genuine digital agility." I found a seat at the room's rear, observing as Elliot presented what essentially amounted to a complete destruction of my life's work. He displayed intricate diagrams contrasting the legacy monolith, represented by a threatening gray block, with a colorful distributed cloud architecture. "The existing system architecture creates considerable enterprise risk," he proclaimed, advancing to a slide labeled Risk Assessment. "It's susceptible to single failure points, restricts our capacity to utilize cutting-edge cloud services, and frankly relies excessively on tribal knowledge." That final point was accompanied by a meaningful look in my direction. The implication was obvious. I was the tribe, and my knowledge represented a liability rather than an asset. "Questions?" Elliot inquired after outlining a proposal for complete reconstruction that would require only 18 months. "Yes," I responded, raising my hand. "Have you examined the actual performance data of the existing system or calculated the security implications of transferring our client information to a distributed cloud architecture?" Elliot smiled thinly. "The advantages of cloud-native architecture are extensively documented in the industry, Nain. We don't need to reinvent existing solutions here." "That's not what I questioned," I persisted. "Our current system has maintained 99.97% uptime over the past 5 years and zero, absolutely zero, security breaches. What's your anticipated reliability for this new architecture?" The room became uncomfortable. Marina intervened before Elliot could respond. "These are specifics we'll develop during implementation planning," she said smoothly. "Today's session focuses on strategic direction. In other words, we've already decided, so cease asking inconvenient questions." Following the meeting, James from the development team approached me in the hallway. He had been at Northwell nearly as long as I had. That was harsh, he said quietly. For what it's worth, most of us understand the platform isn't the issue. Politics, man. I nodded, appreciating the support but recognizing its limitations. James had a family to provide for. He couldn't afford to oppose this initiative. That evening, I remained late, alone in the office as usual. I accessed the repository containing the Parker Crypt library and examined the licensing terms. Just as I recalled, Northwell possessed a license to utilize it, but I retained complete ownership and authorship rights. More significantly, the documentation explaining how it integrated with the platform's most critical security features existed primarily in my memory. I created a comprehensive backup of everything, including my personal notes and design documents. A peculiar tranquility settled over me. I wouldn't sabotage anything. That wasn't my approach. But I also wouldn't make this simple for them. They desired my system eliminated? Fine. They would discover precisely what they were sacrificing. The following 3 months represented a masterclass in corporate doublespeak. I was simultaneously essential to our transition strategy and clearly headed toward departure. I attended numerous meetings where Elliot and his expanding team of new employees analyzed my work, frequently misinterpreting fundamental aspects of the architecture. The authentication component appears unnecessarily complicated, one of the new developers remarked during a code review session. We could substitute this with a standard OAuth implementation. I had to restrain myself. The authentication system was complex because it managed specialized access control for regulated industries with automatic compliance, logging that satisfied 3 different international standards. But explaining that would simply label me as resistant to change. Instead, I obediently documented everything they requested, conducted knowledge transfer sessions, and responded to questions. But I was selective regarding the depth I provided, especially concerning Parker Crypt. This encryption library, is this open source? Elliot asked one afternoon, frowning at his screen. No, it's proprietary, I replied carefully. Licensed to Northwell under specific conditions. He made a notation without looking up. We'll probably substitute it with industry standard encryption. AES or something. I didn't bother clarifying that Parker Crypt employed a customized implementation of AES with additional security layers specifically designed for our data types. Again, what would be the purpose? As the transition advanced, I became increasingly isolated. My team was gradually reassigned to the modernization project. My input was needed less and less frequently. I could sense myself being pushed to the periphery. One Tuesday morning, I found myself alone at my desk while everyone else attended a planning meeting I hadn't been invited to. My computer chimed with a calendar invitation. Transition planning, HR office, tomorrow 10 a.m. So this was it. I spent the remainder of the day organizing my personal belongings and downloading my work to an external drive. Nothing confidential or proprietary, just my own notes, designs, and the Parker Crypt documentation I had written. The next morning, I met with Vanessa from HR and Marina. The conversation was predictably clinical. As the modernization project enters its subsequent phase, we're restructuring the development organization, Vanessa explained, reading from what was clearly a prepared statement. Unfortunately, your current position won't exist in the new structure. We want to express gratitude for your years of service, Marina added, not quite meeting my eyes. Your contribution to Northwell has been substantial. I was presented with a modest severance package, contingent on a 2-week transition period and signing a standard non-disparagement agreement. Nothing about the proprietary encryption library or my continuing ownership rights. Either they hadn't read the licensing agreement or they didn't consider it significant. Is there anything you'd like to discuss about the transition? Marina asked, her tone suggesting she hoped the answer was no. I considered my options carefully. I could raise the issue of Parker Crypt now, making it clear that they didn't have rights to continue using it. I could demand additional compensation or threaten legal action. But something told me to wait. Let them discover the problem independently. No, I said finally. I think everything's clear. For the final 2 weeks, I was the exemplary departing employee. I documented additional systems, answered questions, and even helped troubleshoot a few issues with the prototype of the new platform. No one seemed to notice that I never fully explained how Parker Crypt integrated with the audit logging system or the customer data vault. On my last day, there was a small gathering in the break room. People I'd worked with for years shuffled awkwardly, ate cake, and made vague comments about staying in touch. Marina made a brief appearance, thanked me again for my service, and disappeared back to her office. As I packed the last of my belongings, James stopped by my desk. "This place won't be the same without you," he said, genuine sadness in his voice. "No," I agreed. "It certainly won't." Life after Northwell was surprisingly tranquil. I took a month off, caught up on sleep, and reconnected with friends I'd neglected during my workaholic years. I updated my resume, but didn't immediately search for a new position. 12 years at one company had left me financially secure enough to be selective about my next move. Occasionally, I would receive LinkedIn messages from former colleagues, mostly casual check-ins. But about 2 months after my departure, the messages took on a different tone. "Hey Nain, hope you're doing well. Quick question. Do you remember how the compliance logging was configured for the financial services module? Having some issues with the audit trails." I provided vague answers, nothing they couldn't have figured out from the documentation I'd left behind. But the questions kept coming, growing more frequent and more specific. "Where exactly is the Parker Crypt integration documented? Do you have any notes on the custom authentication protocols? Can you clarify how the token validation process interfaces with the encryption layer?" I knew what was happening without being told. The new system was hitting roadblocks, specifically around the secure components built on Parker Crypt. Without detailed knowledge of my custom library, they were struggling to replicate its functionality. One evening, my phone rang. James's number. "Hey," I answered. "How's it going?" There was background noise on his end, voices raised in what sounded like a heated discussion. "It's a total disaster," he said, his voice low. "The new platform went live last week, and everything's falling apart. Authentication is failing across departments. We've got data leaking between client instances, and the compliance team is freaking out because the audit logs aren't capturing the required information." "That sounds serious," I said, keeping my tone neutral. "Serious doesn't begin to cover it. We've got a major contract with Veltric Systems on hold because we can't prove compliance with their security requirements. Elliot is nowhere to be found, literally. He's not responding to calls or emails. And Marina." He lowered his voice further. "Marina is looking for someone to blame." I didn't respond immediately, digesting this information. Part of me felt vindicated. They disregarded my expertise and were now facing the consequences. But I'd spent 12 years building Northwell's platform. Despite everything, I didn't want to see it fail catastrophically. "I'm sorry to hear that," I said finally. "I hope they figure it out." "Nain," James said, frustration evident in his voice. "You know they can't figure it out without you. Nobody understands how Parker Crypt works. We didn't even realize how central it was to the entire security architecture until everything started breaking." I remained silent. "They're going to call you," he continued. "Marina's been in meetings with the board all day. Just, when they do call, remember that not everyone agreed with how they treated you." After hanging up, I sat in my living room, thinking. This was exactly the scenario I had anticipated, though perhaps sooner than expected. The question was, how would I respond when they reached out? I didn't have to wait long to find out. The next morning, my phone displayed Marina's name. I let it go to voicemail. She called twice more before sending a text. "Nain, we need to discuss an urgent matter regarding the platform. Please call me at your earliest convenience." I didn't respond. Instead, I called my attorney, Catherine Williams. We'd worked together years ago when I was setting up the licensing for Parker Crypt, and I trusted her judgment. "They've backed themselves into a corner," she said after I explained the situation. "Legally, they can't continue using your library without a valid license. And practically, they can't fix their problems without your expertise. So, what do you suggest?" "Let me handle the communication," Catherine said. "If you're willing to help them, we should formalize terms that recognize your value." And Nain, your value just went up considerably. 3 days later, I sat across from Marina in a downtown law office, Catherine beside me. The conference room had that distinctive tension of lawyers trying to be cordial while preparing for battle. Marina's team included Northwell's general counsel and a representative from the board. Marina looked terrible, dark circles under her eyes, hair pulled back severely. The platform meltdown was clearly taking its toll. "Let's be direct," Catherine began. "Northwell is currently using proprietary software licensed to them under specific terms. Those terms included Nain's continued involvement with the platform. Since that relationship has been terminated, the license is effectively revoked." Northwell's lawyer frowned. The software was developed while Miss Parker was an employee. As a separate project, Catherine interrupted, with clear documentation establishing her ownership. "I have the original licensing agreement here, signed by Northwell's previous CTO." She slid a document across the table. "You'll note paragraph 7 specifically addresses termination conditions." There was a tense silence as they reviewed the document. I watched Marina's face as the reality of the situation sank in. "Setting aside the legal technicalities," Marina said finally, "we have an immediate practical problem. Critical systems are failing. Client data is at risk. We need assistance restoring functionality." "And Nain is prepared to provide that assistance," Catherine replied smoothly, "under the right conditions." I listened as Catherine outlined our terms: a 6-month consulting retainer at triple my former salary, full authorship credit and reinstated developer license ownership, and a formal acknowledgement of my role in the platform's architecture. Marina winced at the salary figure, but didn't immediately reject it. The board representative leaned over to whisper something to her. After a brief discussion, Marina straightened in her chair. "We can agree to the financial terms," she said, "but the acknowledgement creates a complicated precedent." "It's not complicated at all," I interjected, speaking for the first time. "You're using my work. You're asking for my help. Acknowledge that publicly." The room fell silent again. I could see Marina calculating, weighing her pride against the mounting crisis at Northwell. "We'll need time to discuss internally," the board representative finally said. "Of course," Catherine replied, "but I should note that Nain has received inquiries from other organizations. Her schedule is filling up quickly." It was a bluff, but an effective one. Marina's expression tightened. "Give us 24 hours, she said. They didn't need that long. By that evening, Catherine received a counterproposal that accepted most of our terms with minor adjustments to the consulting timeline. After a brief discussion, I agreed. The next morning, I walked back into Northwell's offices, not as an employee, but as a consultant with clearly defined authority. The development team's relief was palpable. James actually hugged me when I arrived, whispering, "Thank God you're back." I spent the next week diagnosing and fixing the critical issues with the platform. It wasn't particularly challenging. Most of the problems stemmed from fundamental misunderstandings about how Parker Crypt integrated with the other security modules. Once those were resolved, the system stabilized. What was most satisfying wasn't the generous consulting fee, or even the public acknowledgement of my work. It was watching the gradual realization spread across the organization that the legacy system they'd been so eager to replace wasn't outdated. It was sophisticated, purpose-built, and highly effective. Elliot never returned to Northwell. I heard through the grapevine that Marina quietly shelved the modernization project after my initial fixes proved successful. I completed my contracted work in just under a month, provided comprehensive documentation of Parker Crypt, this time with no omissions, and walked out of Northwell for the second time, my reputation restored and my future secure. 6 months after my consulting engagement with Northwell ended, I received an unexpected email from Jackson, the original founder. He'd been following the company from afar and had heard about the platform disaster through his network. "Incredible work," he wrote. "Not just the technical aspects, but how you handled the whole situation. It reminded me why I hired you in the first place." He was starting a new venture focused on secure logistics for healthcare suppliers and wanted to discuss a potential role. We met for coffee the following week. "I need someone who can build things right from the ground up," he explained. "Someone who understands that flashy isn't always better. And I'm prepared to offer equity this time." 2 weeks later, I joined Cypress Ember as Chief Technology Officer with a substantial equity stake and a clear mandate to build secure, reliable systems my way. Meanwhile, changes were happening at Northwell. Marina stepped down as CTO, citing personal reasons that everyone understood were related to the platform fiasco. The modernization project was officially canceled, and the company quietly began rebuilding around the original platform architecture, with proper credit given to its creator. My experience had made me something of a legend in Eugene's tech community. I was invited to speak at conferences about system architecture and security design. At one such event, I bumped into Elliot in the hallway. He was trying to pitch his services to a group of startup founders using the same buzzwords and flashy slides. When he saw me, he quickly excused himself and disappeared into the crowd. The most satisfying moment came when Northwell's board chair reached out personally to apologize for how the situation had been handled and to ask if I would consider joining the company's technical advisory board. I declined politely, explaining that my new role kept me fully occupied. "That's unfortunate," he said. "Your expertise would be invaluable." Yes, I agreed, it would. At Cypress Ember, I built a new platform with all the lessons learned from my years at Northwell. It was modern without being trendy, secure without being cumbersome, and most importantly, fully documented and properly attributed. I assembled a team of developers who valued substance over style, thorough testing over rapid deployment. Instead of Elliot's approach of chasing every new technology trend, we focused on selecting the right tools for each specific task. When cloud solutions made sense, we used them. When traditional architecture was more appropriate, we weren't afraid to buck the trends. 1 year after joining Cypress Ember, we launched our platform. The healthcare logistics industry took notice immediately. Our security-first approach resonated strongly in a sector dealing with sensitive patient data and complex compliance requirements. Jackson and I had a clear vision: build something that worked exceptionally well, explain it clearly, and let the results speak for themselves. No buzzwords, no exaggerated claims, just solid technology solving real problems. Parker Crypt evolved too. I open-sourced a version of it, maintaining a proprietary extension for our specific needs at Cypress Ember. The open-source community embraced it, contributing improvements and expanding its capabilities. 3 years into this new chapter, Cypress Ember was acquired by a major healthcare technology provider. The valuation was heavily influenced by our platform's reputation for security and reliability. My equity stake meant I could retire if I wanted to, but the work was too satisfying to walk away from. I stayed on as CTO with expanded responsibilities and a team that had grown from 5 to 50. Every new hire heard the story of Northwell, not as a tale of revenge, but as a lesson in the value of building things right and standing up for your work. The acquisition made headlines in the industry press. Several former Northwell colleagues reached out to congratulate me, including James, who is now looking for a new opportunity himself. I hired him immediately. Looking back on my journey from Northwell to Cypress Ember, I realized that true success wasn't about fighting against change, but about standing firmly in the value of your work. And sometimes, the best revenge is simply letting your code speak for itself.